Good morning, Baltimore, and welcome to Wake Up Call, Baltimore's #1 hit morning talk show. We are here today to discuss a very controversial topic in the media lately due to a news article that was released earlier this week that identified the true identity of the HeLa cell donor. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, HeLa cells are an immortal cell culture that was developed by researchers in Johns Hopkins Hospital just about a decade ago that have been used in over 60,000 medical research studies, some of which eradicated polio and came up with treatments for multiple cancers. We're here today joined with Dr. George Gay, who was the lead physician and medical researcher that propagated this HeLa cell line, along with his colleague, Dr. Chester Southam of New York, who injected over 256 otherwise healthy patients with these HeLa cells in the name of medical research. How are you two doing today?
Good. Doing pretty good. Thanks for asking.
That's great. My first question is for Dr. Southam. What drove you to inject those 256 otherwise healthy patients with a potentially deadly virus?
Well, as many of you might not know, I'm a virologist, and pretty much my job is to study viruses. With that being said, to study the effects that they have on humans and others. And so pretty much my goal was to inject, in the beginning, cancer patients with these cancerous HeLa cells because I wanted to test to see the effects that they had on these patients, whether or not the tumors would grow or shrink. But after a while, after repeating these experiments, I wanted to get accurate results. And in order for me to get those accurate results, I had to start testing on healthy patients to truly see how they affected and played their role in whether or not they got cancer or not.
Okay. And who are these healthy patients specifically that you researched on?
Some consisted of elderly people, some young people, but majority of the patients I tested on were inmates at the Ohio State Penitentiary.
Okay, very interesting. Now I have a question for both of you, starting with Dr. Gay. What do you consider your code of ethics in regard to your profession?
The code of ethics for any medical researcher is to help find a way for the advancement of the medical field. Yes, I took cells from Henrietta Lacks, which everybody knows has helped find cures to many diseases and viruses that have plagued the country. One of them, as we all know, is polio. At the time, polio was growing to be one of the most devastating epidemics that has ever plagued the country.
And I did read that you actually sent the HeLa cells to Dr. Salk, who then created the Salk vaccine, which was used to eradicate polio. Am I correct?
This is true.
Very interesting. And all of physicians do take a Hippocratic oath. Am I correct? And this oath has been revised in recent years to the Declaration of Geneva, in which it says, I believe, that you vow to do no harm. How do you two interpret this declaration for physicians?
For starters, for me, the oath talks about initially, always working with dignity. And when it comes to making medical advancements, I feel as though, that's something I did. Now, when you go back, you want to talk about doing no harm. You're right. We try our best not to inflict harm and pain upon our patients. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do when it comes to testing our research.
Did many of your otherwise healthy patients become infected with the cancer virus?
Some of them did, some of them didn't.
So you did do some harm?
Some harm to an extent, but whenever I practiced and did my research, I always did it with society's interest at best.
I think our viewers understand. Dr. Gay, how do you interpret this oath?
The Declaration of Geneva is for physicians to be unbiased towards any of the patients, whether it's race or gender.
Okay. Can you two honestly say that you believe that you withheld your oath?
Absolutely. I work with dignity all the time. I only look to help society and make advancements in the scientific and medical field. Yes, I know you bring up the fact that some of my patients did become infected with cancers who, were before healthy. But that's just, the cost of medical research. To kill one, to save a million, wouldn't you do it yourself?
Dr. Gay, how do you feel you withheld your oath as a physician?
In this case, I was not the main physician that was in contact with Henrietta Lacks. It was Howard Jones, and due to this scenario, I was not obligated to upheld the Declaration of Geneva.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, as a medical researcher, you are not inclined to get consent, or are you just not held to the same ethical standards in this case as a lead physician?
I was not held as the same.
So do you believe that Dr. Howard Jones, who was her lead physician, was unjust for not obtaining consent before he removed the tissue sample for your research?
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. Now, do either of you suffer any repercussions for either of your acts in regards to the HeLa cell research?
I can't speak for my colleague, Professor Gate, but for me, back in 1963, I was actually conducting a cancer research study at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital up in New York. Unfortunately, some of the doctors disagreed with my practices, and eventually
And why is that?
they felt as though they were inhumane and unjust.
For not obtaining consent.
Consent, and for the fact that they felt as though, some of them felt as though it wasn't okay to inject healthy patients with this potentially deadly virus without letting them know.
Rightfully so. And Dr. Gay, did you suffer any repercussions for your acts?
I did not.
Okay. Do you believe that the Lacks family is entitled to any of the profits from your medical research, which, if I'm not mistaken, has turned into a potentially multi-billion-dollar industry?
I believe they should be compensated for what they've contributed to the medical field. At this time, they have not been contributed, but who's to know that they will not in the future?
Very interesting. Do you have any input on whether you believe they should be compensated?
I feel as though they should to an extent because, the HeLa cells, as we've all been, stating, really have played one of, if not the biggest, advancements and contributing factors in the medical field in itself. However, it wasn't Gay or I who did what we did to seek profit. It was those large biotech companies such as Invitrogen that actually decided to commercialize the idea and begin to sell their cells. So to seek compensation, I feel as though you need to contact, their CEOs, the members of those companies.
Very interesting. Now, just a question for both of you. Do you believe that any of the injustice that was done to the Henrietta Lacks had anything to do with the fact that she was a young and impoverished African-American woman?
No, not at all. And the reason I say this is because, for me, yes, a lot of my test subjects were of the lower class and prisoners and inmates, but I had no problem at all injecting, people from higher society.
Would you ever inject somebody of high society
Absolutely.
with these HeLa cells?
Absolutely.
Did you inject any patients? You did inject over 256 patients with these cells. Were any of them high society?
No, I didn't.
Very interesting. Now, lastly, just to wrap up this interview, would either of you change anything that you've done in the name of medical research?
Not at all. I know my medical license was suspended for a year because of that investigation. They, they concluded that what I did was unprofessional and deceitful. But I feel as though had I not, practiced my research and did what I did, that this problem might still exist today. That, patients wouldn't need to sign consent forms. That, medical researchers could just pretty much get away with doing what they want. So no, I wouldn't change anything. I stand by my decision.
Dr. Gay, would you have done anything differently? Would you have gone back and gotten any consent before you did this experiment?
Absolutely not. Because if we were to go get consent, who's to know if Henrietta would have said no, then we wouldn't have had the opportunity with her cells to find cures and vaccines for many types of diseases.
Okay, well, thank you two for coming out to join us today, and thank you for our viewers for tuning in. Make sure you tune in next week for Wake Up Call, and stick around to hear Bill with the weather.